Military is taking drastic steps to increase convictions in sexual assault cases, such as forcing jurors to watch pro-prosecution videos prior to sexual assault court-martials. Stay tuned for more. Welcome to the Military Law News Network. I'm attorney Michael Waddington, and I'm joined by Timothy Bilecki from his Honolulu-based law firm. How are you doing today, Tim?
I'm good, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing awesome, but there are some disturbing trends out there in court-martial cases. I recently just did a court-martial where panel members were forced to watch a video from the commanding general which specifically addressed victim behavior, what he called victim behavior, and the behavior of so-called perpetrators. And what we learned as part of our voir dire in questioning of the panel about potential unlawful command influence was that the commanding general of this installation produced a video that was 30 minutes in length that specifically addressed service members on the base and the jurors, the panel members, in an upcoming sexual assault court-martial just weeks before the trial. And in that video, he threw out some disturbing and frightening statistics, most of which I think are bogus, but it's our opinion that these videos were designed to specifically influence the outcome and the decision-making of those jurors in that sexual assault court-martial. Have you seen anything like that out there in your neck of the woods?
You know, Mike, we have too, and it's a really disturbing trend. I always believe that when you get to a trial that it's going to be, a jury's going to get it right and they're going to want to do the right thing, and I think we're seeing that by all the acquittals. But as always, wanting to stack the deck, I have seen cases where they make sharp videos, and particularly in the Army, where they talk about victims, victim behavior, how to recognize the signs of a victim. And when you watch these videos, the alarming thing is they're inaccurate. They're not correct. They're not truthful, and they tell the wrong version of what really is the law. And the problem is we get panel members who watch this, whether it's a senior NCO or a officer, and they're seeing this coming directly from the commanding general. Then they get this misconception of what constitutes sexual assault, what sexual assault is or is not, how to recognize the signs of a victim. But when they're not trained to do that, and the incorrect information is being put out. So we have to undo all of that in the court-martial, and it makes it that much more difficult, which is why voir dire is becoming extraordinarily important in a trial, and that's just picking your jury, knowing who's on your jury, and educating them as to what the law really is. And the videos that they're putting out in sharp or otherwise, you have to put those aside, and you can't use those inside of a courtroom. Now the problem, Mike, is many members will say that they can do that, and oftentimes they get rehabilitated by the prosecutor during the voir dire process. But if the commanding general of an installation or of a base tells an individual that this is how you recognize sexual assault, this is what sexual assault is, this is what it means if you were intoxicated, you cannot consent, all of that is not correct. It's very difficult to undo that, and it makes it a much more difficult undertaking. Certainly we've been successful at doing that, but you have to know that that's coming and know how to get around that.
No, Tim, I completely agree with you, but the disturbing part of it was this. I think this video, the one that I saw, took it one step too far. First of all, the judge determined that that was not unlawful command influence and that it would not influence the panel. However, 5 out of the panel members who came in, before they heard any facts in the case, when asked the question, will you consider, when determining whether someone is credible or not, the fact that that person repeatedly changed their story and lied in the past, will you consider that in determining whether or not someone is a liar? And several people raised their hand and said they would not consider the fact that someone previously lied about being sexually assaulted or changed their story. And we found that to be very disturbing because that's contradictory to what the law is. You're supposed to consider, if you're on the jury, whether or not someone's story has changed, whether or not the person intentionally lied, whether or not the person can or cannot actively recall. But by sitting down jurors right before court-martial and then basically being given instruction by this commanding general where he's saying if the person changes their story, then that means they're more likely a victim and you should not consider the fact that they've changed their story, that they've lied in the past, in determining whether or not they're victim, because those are all, quote, victim behaviors. So there were several panel members who were kicked off the jury just for that. And I thought that that was interesting because I had never seen a military installation or a general go to that length to try to intentionally taint a jury prior to a court-martial.
I think, Mike, it shows a lot of the desperation that the commands and the senior leadership must feel. There's so much pressure to convict and show that the military is taking a stance on sexual assault that there are so many cases where a service member is accused, often falsely accused, where they should never go to a trial. But they send these cases forward to a trial anyways, and they're shaking their head as to why we get acquittals right and left and why they're exonerated. And I think they have to answer a lot of those questions. So it wouldn't surprise me in the least bit if you have senior leadership trying to taint panels by making these videos. I mean, where essentially you're saying if someone tells the truth, then they mustn't be lying. If they're not, I should say, if someone is not inconsistent and they tell the same story over and over, then they must be telling the truth. But on the other hand, if they're telling a different story and they're lying, and one day they say A, the next day they say B, well, that's the way a victim would react, so they must also be telling the truth. You can't have it both ways. And this nonsense of counterintuitive victim behavior, it's just that, it's nonsense.
What I find is when we're able to get rid of these jurors that are biased going into the case, the typical military service, the panel member, the jurors, are generally fair. But it's surprising to me how often you get these people on the panel that just have who were originally seated on the panel. A lot of times we kick them off, but they have no common sense. Like what you just said. If someone constantly tells the truth and never changes their story, which is what I was always told to do as a kid, because the truth never changes. When you lie, you can't remember what you said. But for a grown adult who's a colonel in the United States military sitting there saying, no, I will not even consider if someone previously lied 5 or 6 times. I'm not even going to consider their past lying, I think is illogical and quite frightening. They really need to know how to target these biased panel members and get them kicked off, because if not, you're going down.
It's ludicrous, and that's, I always tell, you can't worry about crown molding if you haven't built the foundation, and picking a jury really is about pouring the foundation of a house. We see the same thing in alcohol cases, where these sapper videos and these sharp videos, they put out that if a soldier or an airman or a Marine has 1 drink, they can't consent. When I'm picking a jury and I'm talking to the jurors, I ask them that. Has anyone been taught, or has it been briefed that if you have 1 drink, you cannot consent? And I'm always shocked that I typically get 3 or 4, sometimes even 5 members. These are E8s, E9s, colonels who are saying that they believe that. Then I often follow up with the question, all right, Colonel Jones, and using a name, what if you went out to have dinner with your wife? You had a glass of wine, she had a glass of wine, you go back and have sex with your wife. Based on the principle you just told me, you would have sexually assaulted their wife. And then you get to pause, and they have to think about it, and then sometimes the light goes on and sometimes it doesn't. But I'm always amazed at how these members can sometimes take common sense and throw it right out of the equation as soon as you start talking about sexual assault. And the real key is being able to understand that, being able to ask the right questions, and being able to pick the proper jury. Because if you don't kick those people off, your client's going to jail. I don't care how good your case is. If they have those hard and fast beliefs, the key is you've got to get them off your jury.
Tim, there's another interesting fact. I'm not going to even call it a fact, but it was presented as a fact in this video that the general did. And from what I understand, these videos are being shown around the world at military installations worldwide, very similar videos on these sapper down days. And basically it's the general or the commanding officer or the admiral sitting in front of a camera reading a script that was written by what I call the prosecution team, which is the SARCs, the sapper people, along with the SJ office, who all have input in this. And in this video, they actually had a prosecutor in the video talking, and they were throwing out statistics. And here's one interesting statistic. The general said 5%, he had this little chart and this little graph, 5% of service members are serial rapists. Serial rapists. Not 5% might have gotten drunk and had sex with someone, or might be criminals, but 5% are serial rapists, like Dexter style, like they hunt women down and rape them in a serial fashion. And he said about 20% of service members, in addition to that 5, are on the borderline, and they could become serial rapists. I'm not exaggerating. It's like 20, 25%, he said. And the other 70% are just normal people. And so basically what he's saying is that about 30% of the military service members, and those are all men, because he's talking about men, are either serial rapists. So 3 out of every 10 are serial rapists, or they're borderline, and they could become a serial rapist. And then he went on to give ways to spot these serial rapists, which, and I'll get into the facts here in a second, but before that, I want to ask your opinion on whether or not you think, or you've ever seen any data that either 5% or 30% of military service members are serial rapists or borderline serial rapists. And what are your thoughts on that, Tim?
You know, much like you, I follow the data, and we try to follow the trends every time they come out and present data. There's absolutely no data that I'm aware of that exists, and I do my research that says that to be true. It's almost ridiculous. I mean, to think about that many serial rapists joining the military, it's almost absurd that that could be the case. And how would you know someone's a serial rapist until they've been convicted? And if you convict someone who's been, then they would be often go to the brig and go to jail. They wouldn't be in the military. And so the fact that that many portion of our military are serial rapists, it's really a slap in the face to all of the outstanding service members who raise their right hand to defend and protect the Constitution and do great things every day for the military. These are senior leadership that really is throwing the junior soldiers and Marines and sailors under the bus and giving a horrible name to the military when there's no basis for it. What they're trying to do is use scare tactics which are not based in any facts to scare potential jurors into thinking that we have this rash of rapists running around in the military, and then they say, well, these are the signs, and I know you'll go into them in a second, but these are signs that you see in 90% of people. And then a juror, well, that must be one of the serial rapists that the commanding general is talking about. We've got to put him in prison.
Tim, listen to these signs, and I want to just talk to you about some of the signs that the general said, and he brought in this prosecutor to back it up. You know, the prosecutor was speaking with authority about how to identify what they call sexual perpetrators or serial rapists. One of them is if the person goes to a bar and offers a person of the opposite sex a drink, that's a red flag that they may be a serial rapist. Thoughts?
I can't even keep a straight face as I listen to that. It's so absurd. If that's the reality, then there are serial rapists running all over downtown Honolulu. There are serial rapists at every college campus. There are serial rapists everywhere. Because if going into a bar and buying another individual a drink gives you a sign of being a serial rapist, we have skewed from the path of common sense so far that I don't even know if we can get back on it. It's so ridiculous.
I'm sorry, go on.
It's so ridiculous. It's hard to believe that people would buy into this. But when you put someone with a few stars on their collar or a few stars on their uniform and they start saying it, people start believing it. It's how you drink that type of Kool-Aid is beyond me, but people are drinking it, and to the detriment of service members out there.
Here are a couple more that I want your comments on. If the person then isolates, that's one of they have 5 eyes that identify serial rapists, isolates that person they bought the drink for, meaning they have them one-on-one and they're talking to them, that is a step in the grooming process, and they're therefore on the path to committing a serial rape. So basically, if you buy a girl a drink at a bar and then you go up to her and start talking to her, that's a red flag that you're a serial rapist.
Well, I can say that almost every weekend of my days of both Boston College and at the University of Miami for law school, I've checked 2 of those boxes already. I mean, going to a bar, buying a female or someone of the opposite sex or someone that you're interested in a drink, what do you want to do? You want to talk to them and get to know them. What the military is doing, they're taking the steps that every individual uses to go meet someone, and they're turning them into the signs of a serial rapist. It's so ridiculous. It's hard to even talk about it with a straight face, but this is what the military is doing. But for the viewers, you think these are bad. Mike, talk about the other steps that are in these videos.
Well, Tim, what they did was to prove some of these points, they played a video that was actually an actor on the screen talking about how the serial rapist thinks. He goes to a bar, he sees a girl, he buys her drinks, he isolates her, he talks to her on her own, he buys her another drink, he then he asks her if she wants to go outside and he'll walk her home. And then as they're walking home, he's touching her and he's overstepping his boundaries. And then they jump over all these other factors. And next thing you know, the girl's back in the guy's room saying, "Why am I in your room? How did I get here?" And then he's like, "It's fine." And next thing you know, they have sex, and she's gritting her teeth in this video. And she doesn't, according to this video, she's not resisting. The first question I had is, why did she go into his apartment, first of all, and why didn't she just get up and leave? Sure. Because the guy never threatened her or anything like that. But they tell this story basically about a guy who picks up a girl, takes her back to the room, has sex with her, and then afterwards, after the video is done, he looks at the camera and he says, "I am a rapist," and then it shows the girl, and basically she says that she was raped and her life's ruined forever. But what they're trying to do is to target, your typical going out to a bar, finding a partner, and possibly hooking up with them, and trying to get people thinking that anytime that happens, then that person is a victim of rape, which is insulting to women as well, because a lot of women go out to bars and intentionally meet guys and hook up with them. That's what they do. They drink, they meet a guy, they hook up with him, and they move on. But the point of the video is that anyone who has these steps is a serial rapist. And then they hit other things, such as, does the guy use lewd vocabulary and make sexual jokes? Which means about 80% of the military that I know that are men that make sexual jokes, that use vulgarity, are borderline sexual rapists, people you need to watch out for. And the other thing is, do they talk about sexual things, at the workplace, like two guys out on an outpost making fun of each other or joking around? Those are also signs of someone who's a potential serial rapist. So what they're telling you is, when you see those signs, don't let those people fall into that top 5%, which are the actual committing serial rapists. You got to report them. That's the whole idea.
Is they're taking the factual basis for the vast majority of these 120 sexual assault court-martials. Two individuals meet, there's alcohol involved, they go back to the barracks, they go back to the dorms, they hook up, someone has a falling out, there's some motivation for making an assault. Someone is either blacked out, whether that's a real blackout or a blackout of convenience. This is your typical fact pattern. And so what they're doing is distilling the typical fact pattern that you see in sexual assault allegations. Most of these end up in acquittals if you have the right type of a defense. And they're trying to say that these certain factors, which you see in almost 70-80% of cases, these are serial rapists. And the reason they're doing that is so when a juror sees that, they're thinking back to the videos that they watch and say, wow, that was sign 1, that was sign 2, that was sign 3. And while that's has nothing to do with the law, it may be ingrained in their mind, especially if they heard it from the prosecutor, they've heard it from the general, and they make these videos, which are fairly high quality, big dollar videos. They want to make them more inclined to convict. And that's a real problem that has to be taken head on in trial. And if an attorney doesn't understand that going in, the odds are really going to be stacked against them trying to win a trial.
Tim, you know what happened in this case, though, is the prosecution was getting desperate. We won this case, full acquittal, but the prosecution was trying to bring out, he initially argued that this general's video had nothing to do with this case, it wasn't unlawful command influence, and the judge agreed with him. Then we get into the case, and he's like quoting things and factors out of the video that the general just put out, like saying, oh, he isolated her, he gave her drinks, he was acting angry, and he was upset, he was angry towards women, and all these different types of factors which came from that video. He was then trying to apply that to the facts of our case, which were unsuccessful, but you have to be careful with that, because if you don't know what you're doing and you're just picking up one of these cases, or you have a military lawyer that is afraid to stand up and challenge the prosecutor who, for whatever reason, or is afraid to challenge panel members because of rank, or you have a civilian that doesn't know what he's doing, which there's many of them out there, then they're not going to pick up on these red flags and know how to challenge these panel members and fight back and try to win your case against a prosecution that's pulling out every dirty trick in the book to try to win.
And I think that's the real bottom line here, Mike, is sexual assault cases in the military are getting more difficult, they're getting more complicated, and it's not necessarily the fact patterns that are getting more complicated, it's what's underneath the surface. It's all of the pressure that's been put on prosecutors, on commanders, on jurors, and you need to be able to take that head on, deal with that in emotions practice, deal with that in voir dire, deal with that in the cross-examinations and in the closing argument, because if you don't understand that, and you walk into a trial, and a lot of military attorneys, like you said, they're scared to challenge members because they're a captain or they're a lieutenant, and they're challenging a colonel. Or if you have a civilian who hasn't walked the walk and been in the trenches, you can try the best case that they know how to do, but if they're missing those aspects of it, they may get back and wonder why their client was convicted. So I think it's incredibly important that your military attorney understands all of these nuances and what's going on with the system, because if they don't, they can try the best case that they know how, and you may still lose. And that's a great example of why in your particular case, I know we talked about those facts at length, all of the odds were stacked against you. They did everything possible, but you fought them at every turn. You fought them in motions. You fought them during the jury selection process. You integrated those into your cross-examinations. You integrated those into the closing argument. And when they tried to do that, it failed, and your client was acquitted. And I think that's incredibly important for an attorney to know. And I think that's the real takeaway from this Military Law News Network program, is that the military is even more so trying to stack the deck, but they're doing it in ways that are more difficult to see and in ways that are less readily apparent, especially to those who are still wearing the uniform or still part of the process. And if you don't understand them, don't recognize them, and most importantly, know how to take them out, your odds of winning are going to be substantially lower. And I think that's the real takeaway today, Mike.
Tim, I completely agree with you. And stay tuned for future episodes. We plan on filming these episodes, getting back to our regular schedule of once a week. If you have any questions, please post them on YouTube or contact us, and we will specifically address your questions and concerns in future updates. Thanks, Tim.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Take care.
Take care.